went through the. Sorry, do you hear me, Steve?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So yesterday, me and Derek went through InToto and Salsa the formats. They like when we went through it, what we eventually concluded is that InToto is a fairly generic envelope format, and like what we found through our research is that if we build a standard which can eventually become a predicate in their InToto, we can still stand alone, provide or enable users to use InToto as an envelope format, or we can also provide flexibility in saying that, hey, if you don't like InToto, you can still use other standards for enveloping the attestation. So that is one conclusion, right? So the second one is Salsa has a attestation format called VSA, and that is to verifying software, or there's it's an abbreviation which I don't fully
verification software, a summary attestation.
Yeah, verification summary attestation. Thank you, Derek. So the verification summary attestation is specifically associated to Salsa compliance. What we found is that the format they provide, or the specification they provide, can be easily forked to our use cases. For example, ISO 27000 or SOC, or like it is. Like if we can go through the VSA format quickly if you wish to, but what we found is that the format itself is tuned to Salsa, but it can be extended for SOC. It would be a quick turnaround for us if we can fork that and just extend it for our use cases. Those are the two things which we kind of concluded from yesterday. We can Derek, if you want.
Yeah, if I can add on a little bit to that, the VSA format specifically would support use case number 1 that we had documented in that working document of ours. And when we were looking at the others, we kind of figured that we can lump number 2, 3, and 4 together into one overall use case where you need to share details with a trusted party, either an internal or external party in the form of like an auditor or a compliance team. So all 3 of those use cases specifically would wrap up in that umbrella very nicely. And then that case for use case number 1 really was more for, hey, there was already an external auditor, they already did something, and we want to just convey the results of that audit rather than all of the details of the audit, which is common business practice in a lot of the market right now, because you don't want to share all of your internal notes and findings with people outside of your organization. That's the whole point of having an independent auditor come through and say, yes, they did their job. That's a large part of the point. So we kind of found that for that use case 2, 3, and 4, there was some good work that had been done in that Sky predicate in the InToto world, which we might be able to adapt to meet that use case. But that we'd have to kind of, that's where I think that we could put some real work in to help convey that in that level of detail. And then number 6, use case 6, is really an additional definition for some kind of a policy language of, hey, I want SOC 2 tier type 2, not type 1, or you have to really build a different specification entirely for that that would work with our other specifications perhaps. But that's kind of what we were what we did when we looked through the use cases that were itemized out.
Number 6 is very common too, by the way.
Is very which?
Is very common too,
Yep.
by the way. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh, sorry, I meant number 5. Number 6 is one that, yes, we would have to put that in several cases. That's something where VSA, for example, had a pass fail. And there were a couple of questions that Manoj and I had yesterday around that. Because, for example, with SOC 2, you still get your letter of attestation, which is a pass, right? But there can still be findings within there, which it doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean that you got 80%. It means you had findings. And, you know, everybody has them. No one's perfect. It's just the point is to document them and show that you're aware of them. So that was one of the questions we had is when we're talking about the standard, for example, VSA, it's completely pass fail. But if we were using that with, again, the SOC 2 example, our organization has the SOC 2 letter. It has the audit that's been done. We have some findings. We did pass it. Did we not pass it? That's a question. And how would we say that we passed it at 80% versus 100%? In that instance, it may not necessarily, we may not want to have that level of detail for use case 1. We may want to say, here is our letter of attestation from our auditor, right, which has all of the details within it, and we're wrapping it in this JSON format for easy transfer and description of metadata for what it is. But the actual point is we have the letter, and then you can review it in a human way. Otherwise, we'd get into the world of having to document every single part of every single standard that we'd want to work through. And maybe that's not the best use of our time. I don't know. It's kind of why we wanted to get a little more clarity on the use cases a little bit as well. But that's kind of what we were talking about yesterday and what we were able to break out of the docs as we were thinking it through.
Got it. Yeah, I'm looking at the.
So I had a
Yes.
thought real
Go
quick.
ahead, Jeff.
I guess I feel like the policy decisions are separate from the claims part of the argument. I don't know, and I haven't worked this out in my head really yet, but you know, there's a very clear like argument tree to me that's like, you know, standard has these sections and each section has these requirements, and like, you know, there's a logic to it. But then I'm not sure if I'm not sure what role the SBOM should have in either documenting the policy or the decision that's made against that policy.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about last time was decoupling the policy from the attestations. And I actually worked on that a little bit and have an example. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you know, and whatever we choose, right? Your policies need to be, and that could be, you know, your internal policy, it could be SOC 2 requirements, etc. That should be decoupled from the actual attestations themselves. And in doing so, your attestations can actually, for every single claim, you could actually provide evidence for one or more different items in the policy, essentially.
Right, but that's where the use cases thing came in specifically. That's fine if I'm sharing from my corporate perspective. I can share that information with my auditors. I cannot share that information with a third party, right? That's the whole point. That's one of the main reasons why I engage with a third party auditor and abide by a third party framework, so that I don't have to share all of my internal process, all of my internal documentation and records with an external third party. So that's where I was trying to drill in on the use cases and determine, you know, are we talking sharing with an external third party, at which point there are legal and compliance requirements that I would be very worried about sharing, or are we trying to share the summary reports or the high level attestation, certification, whatever it is, from our third party auditors in that instance? So I do see those as very distinct use cases.
I mean, my take is that we should allow an SBOM, we should enable an SBOM to capture all of the claims and evidence. And if the producer decides they don't want to share all of the details, then they can share a subset of it, or they can share the conclusion of it or whatever. But, you know, I think it's a major use case to be able to capture all that information in a machine readable format.
Agreed. And that's why we were trying to group it based on the use cases that we came up with. So that's the type that you're talking about there is basically what we had in our use case 2, 3, and 4. It's all that low level stuff to go to a trusted third party. So we were just trying to drill into like, what are the scenarios where these would be used?
Let me share, I guess, what I've been working on. Let's see. I haven't spent a ton of time on this. But okay, so I basically changed a few things. And I've got this new element called declarations. And within declarations, I have requirements and I have attestations. I honestly don't think this type is even required. Right, we were talking about, like, Jeff had a thing of self-purchaser independent. As long as we capture who the assessor is, I think that's actually more important than the self, because it, it depends, self is in the eye of the beholder, right? If I get the attestation from somebody else, well, self doesn't make any sense to me. But if I know that the organization is the same, then I know it was self. So I'm actually contemplating on removing this because I don't think it adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I just, people do talk about the notion of a self-assessment.
Yep.
And it means something different than a third-party assessment. And that's what I was trying to capture here. Because people do use those terms, and it will immediately help people put them in context.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're right, if you have the details, you could figure it out.
Yeah. So we've got the assessor, and then I basically move the requirements out, and the requirements now for the attestation is just a reference to the actual requirement that's declared. So you could have an attestation that is for multiple requirements. I'm glad you're on the phone, Jeff, because we wanted to talk a little bit about claims and subclaims. I know you had worked on that a little bit, and I wanted to kind of understand why subclaims.
Yeah, so I believe that look, for most of these, when we're looking at a set of requirements, they're usually pretty flat, right? There's like a standard and it has categories, and within each category, there's a list of requirements. So those are actually pretty flat, but I think it's actually better to organize claims into a tree structure. So that, I mean, it would allow you to complete the assurance argument, or the security story, if you will, if you can sort of track the reason for that requirement back to the top level goal that you're trying to achieve. And a flat structure won't allow people to really understand the claims that are being made very well. So like, for instance, you might break your system down into several major components, like the front end and the back end and maybe a few others. And then for each of those, you might want to have a set of claims that you make about them. Like, probably you want to structure them around, confidentiality, integrity, availability, assurance, like those kinds of things. And it naturally forms a tree. It's a threat model, really. And the fact that most of our requirements have been flattened is why a lot of people struggle with them, and they think they're doing these requirements for no reason. But I wanted to at least give people the option of structuring their assurance claims into a tree so that they could track back to, simple high-level claims that they were trying to achieve as a business.
That brings up a question. Should the require, I mean, with that line of thought, should the requirements themselves be a hierarchy?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you know, if I have if we have a hierarchy of claims, then I guess the same argument could be made for having a hierarchy of requirements, kind of like in, you know, in the typical ALM where you have, you know, an epic with stories and tasks.
Yeah, sorry. To me, requirements and claims, same thing, basically.
Okay, okay.
Another question there, though, is would it be better, or an alternative might be to put it as parent and child claims, for example. That way we could still list out all the claims in a flat structure, but we wouldn't have to necessarily have that depth of processing, because otherwise we might have to say how deep are we allowed to go? How nested can we get here? It might be better just to do the parent-child relationship. Might not be. I'm throwing that out there for thought.
Yep.
So the other question I had is, like, each claim at a lower level is going to be based on some requirement, right? So every claim is based on some requirement. Would that be a good assumption?
If your goal is to attest to some standard, then yeah, every claim is a requirement, and you know that's the extent of it. But I guess I think organizations should be able to attest to their security that's maybe not directly tied to a standard or has multiple standards involved. Like, you know,
Yes.
my company, for example, is subject to lots of different standards, and so we'd love to have one structure that we could maintain that organizes all that.
Yes.
And then, oh, okay, so I think we're on the same wavelength. By the way, you know, when you see that subject and predicate stuff in Toto, every requirement has a subject, like what does it apply to, and then the predicate is like what is it required to do, what is required of that subject.
No, I agree. The reason why I asked is, if every claim is attached to a set of requirement in that hierarchy, can every level be considered a separate document and we can just provide a reference to? So for example, a top level claim will provide references to the claim at the lower level as a instead of copying, or not copying, I would say, instead of embedding all of the claims into a single document, can they be references to the other claims, which will just be list of requirements? And like that way we get the tree structure for both the requirements and the claims. But
I guess you could put some section of it into a separate document, but I wouldn't recommend having a document for every level of every branch of every tree, because you could have a tree that went 5 or 6 layers deep. I would think.
So okay, the reason why I ask is this would, like, every team, like if I'm the team which I'm giving you the lowest level of claims, my responsibility will be within my scope. Like, I just create a claim for these requirements, for the requirements given down to me by the security team, and I create a document, and the whole aggregation part can be the security team's responsibility, wherein they work.
Shoot,
on.
I lost him there. I lost you there. I really apologize, but I have to jump. I've got to go do an interview. I'm out here at RSA.
Yeah.
So I'll watch the video of the rest, and I'll try and chime in the document.
All right, Jeff, thanks. Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah, Manoj, to tease out what you were talking about there, I think it might be better to keep them separate, honestly, because to your point, if I'm working in that low level world and I want to get, and all I care about are my details, I don't really care about the higher level requirements that it's mapping up to. I really care about what claims I'm responsible for is kind of where I'm thinking. So keeping those separate, but keeping a good map between them right? That's kind of why I'm leaning more towards that approach. I think that might give us more flexibility in the long run, because again, one claim could be used for multiple things, right? So I don't think it can be a one-to-one mapping. I think it has to be a many-to-many potentially there.
So like from the lowest level perspective, all I care is what are the requirements and what claims I have to make for those requirements. And once I'm done, the aggregation to the top level, which is, for example, a SOC as a standard, is a risk team's work rather than my work, where I collect all towards that standard. In that way, like I'm creating my own claims document for my component, and I give it to you. Either you refer to it or you just take it as a whole and just embed it. That's a I guess that's the part I wanted to discuss in like how do we want to handle that.
Yeah, because theoretically you shouldn't be making an arbitrary claim, right? There should always be a requirement that's tied to the claim.
Yep.
One or more requirements that are tied to the claim.
Right.
So in this one, Steve, how are the claims actually mapped to the requirements?
Well, this is for the attestation itself.
Mhm.
So, and then the attestation has an array of claims. So there should be a one-to-one for the attestation to a particular requirement.
Okay.
This is kind of how this is modeled anyway. Because this one attestation is going to map to one or more requirements. You've got, one or more claims, the evidence backing up those claims, reasoning, and a signature for that one attestation.
Yeah, but I guess the requirement there, like that seems to just be an array, and we don't call out what the requirement is anywhere. So line 44, right? It's a reference to something, but I don't see the something that it's referring to.
Right here.
Oh,
is
you're
the
declaring. Okay, I'm sorry. I understand now. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the identity of this particular requirement.
Mhm.
And here I'm just referring to that identity.
Right. So the assessor is assessing to the listed requirements that are in that array, as opposed to just the requirements in the document in general. And that would support then multiple assessors with multiple.
Right.
Right.
And
got it.
because this is this is also as a BOM link, you can then decouple the requirements from the actual attestations.
Yep. Now, wouldn't you also then want to decouple the claims because they could be used for multiple attestations? So, for example, there's a lot of overlap between ISO and SOC. One claim might go for both of them. Right now, it's nested underneath there. You probably would want to break that out similarly to the requirements, flatten it out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so if we did something like, so I've got the requirements, attestations, and then the claims. And then you
possibly.
basically have something like this. Oops, don't want to do that. I basically want to, oops. I just can't do that today. Basically has something like this, right?
Yeah, and that way your mapping is all in one place up there in theory. Or the thing I'm kind of struggling with is, would you do that underneath under the attestation? Is the attestation the thing that then maps everything together, because that's the thing that we
Right.
care about there? I'm not sure. In my mind, maybe like my mental model right now is that the person doing the assessing is the person who is basically signing off and saying, yes, these claims are accurate. They do map to these requirements. This evidence is sufficient, right? So that's okay. We're good there. And it's sort of like stamping that that's the case. So I kind of see the refs as being part of that, possibly. Not sure. Maybe it needs to be in both places.
Yeah, I guess if you're the compliance team, you could create a BOM of just your requirements.
Mhm.
If you are the technical team, you could create a BOM of just your claims. And then your auditor could then tie everything together.
Yeah, and I think that going back to what Manoj was talking about earlier, right? We're not going to theoretically, we wouldn't be creating claims in a vacuum. The claims should map to the requirements, right? You're not going to want the auditor to go through all of the claims and do all of that mapping. They kind of expect you to do that work for them. When they ask you a question, you know, like, hey, do you review your security logs, right? That's the kind of thing we're saying, yes, we do. Here's an incident as evidence of us doing that, right? So does that need to go right here?
So-
We have the assessor who's going and approving those, or who's signing off basically that these requirements and these claims are mapping together. Do we take that line 47 to 49 and bring that up into the requirements so that the requirement maps to a list of claims that show that that requirement is being met? And then the assessor just says, yes, these requirements are all valid according to that.
I don't think so, because you could have claims that support multiple standards, right? So if I'm doing like multiple, I'm doing SOC 2 and I'm doing something else all at the same time, well, I might have one claim that might actually meet multiple requirements.
I meant the claim ref, not the claim itself. Sorry. So lines 47 through 49 are a reference to the claim, not the claim itself. So I would still say we keep the claim separate, but if we pull the claim ref up into the requirements section, you could have, you know, a dozen requirements for one cert, a dozen requirements for another cert, and the claim could be referenced in multiple places. I think that's would work.
So you're saying something like this, essentially, right?
Yeah, something like that, right? And then if we have multiple requirements that use claim one, it's fine. We're just referring to it. There's no duplication involved then.
Right.
And this might even help with the nesting thing that Jeff was talking about, because you know, maybe we need to talk about nesting our requirements more so than the claims, right?
The only downside I see of this is if you wanted the compliance team to actually manage this, how would they also manage the claims?
Would they, or would they just give the requirement out to the team to make happen? And then the team actually would be putting in the claim that matches that requirement.
Right.
So I do see that the compliance team would write the requirements to a large degree, right? The high level requirements, but the implementation details of how we are matching those requirements, that is the claim in my mind.
So like, I want to like distinguish, like I guess clearly understand what the difference between claim and attestation are. So when I provide, like as a low level team, I provide a claim to the compliance team. Is that an attestation? It's an attestation of, okay, I created this claim for
part of an attestation, because you also have to supply the evidence, and you have to supply the reasoning why you think that claim supports that requirement.
Right. So I provide claim evidence, the requirement which is attached to it, and which is with all these three together, isn't it like an attestation provided by me as a low level team? So
yeah,
wouldn't that mean that the top level attestation is a collection of attestations which is provided by me, instead of collecting claims, we are collecting attestations from a low level team towards the top level standard? Is that because I want to clearly understand, like, building up claims and requirements separately, or building up attestations, which is actually mapping claims and attestations at each level. Is that making sense? Am I did I confuse?
a little bit.
No, I tend to agree though. I think to me that makes more sense, right? as a developer who is providing this evidence, I'm going to attest that this is the evidence necessary for this requirement. And then there's going to be some higher level attestation from the auditor who says, yes, I confirm that the lower level developers or whoever has created their list of evidence and it's all correct and looks good. So
Right.
it's an attestation for the auditor who's going to basically validate the attestations of the lower level folks providing the evidence for that requirement.
Cool. So, and in that case, each level will be a requirement, a list of requirements, claims, and attestation, which is a mapping of requirements to the claims.
Yeah, and I could go so far as to say it's like, I think as you talked about, like internal SBOMs versus external, or BOM internal versus external, right? As the internal BOM would have that lower level attestations associated with it that the individual developers, whoever's providing evidence is for. And then ultimately the auditor attestation is the one that you would want to have at that top level. And then you'd probably strip the lower level ones out. So personal information isn't released as part of that high level BOM, or the individuals are not released as part of that higher level BOM.
Yeah, I
Maybe
like
I went
that
off on a
lot.
limb.
Because that kills two birds with one stone then. We can have the one document format, it'll work for all of the use cases, and then it's just up to filtering out that last, or anything below level 1 basically gets filtered out if you're sharing it externally. So the question is, how do we kind of map that down into JSON format? I'm honestly wondering if we're getting a little too deep in the weeds again, and if it might be better just to do like a high level block diagram, like in diagrams.net or something, just to get the high level relationship between these key pieces and define it out that way. And then we can go in and make sure that the details for each of the pieces are in the right place.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. You want to use something like Draw.io or?
Possibly, like that's the tool I usually use for that stuff. And I don't want to drive that, by the way. So if people think this is a good way to go through it and do that too, we can just keep going in the JSON here too. That's fine. Just throwing it out there as a suggestion.
Yeah, I don't have a preference.
Oh, okay, we can just stay in here then. That's fine.
So whatever people would like, doesn't matter to me.
I was just trying to pull up, I guess. Morning.
So what Ian was actually saying then here would be that the attestations would actually start nesting, or there'd be parent-child relationships between them. And that those
The
would then,
attestations themselves.
right, Ian? Is that that's what you meant, right? Want to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of going to comment around like trying to understand claims versus attestations. I could see the attestations being nested, or I don't even think they necessarily need to be hierarchical. They could just be listed. But I guess the fundamental problem is, to me, is like, I'm not going to want to release signed attestations from individual developers, right? It should come from the auditor. But I do agree that like the claims are effectively attestations. That makes a lot of sense to me. So how does an auditor verify the evidence is delivered and correct and not been tampered with?
Yeah. So
That should be an attestation.
Yeah.
Well,
So
in
what makes
a lot
up
of cases, the auditor is going to create the evidence or find the evidence.
Yeah. They reach out to development teams usually to find the evidence, or to, production support teams to find the evidence. And the evidence can be logs, tickets, any of that kind of stuff. So we're basically saying there's a list of requirements, right? Then there's going to be claims with evidence. Usually, like you're making a claim saying yes, we do. We audit our security logs for, this particular thing. And then you're going to need to provide evidence for that claim in particular.
Yeah, and I think the original comment that claim, you are attesting that claim is that's an attestation.
Well, it's part of an attestation. That's
Well,
the
no,
testimony of an attestation.
No, because you as an individual are saying this is the case. I am making this claim that we do this internal thing. I am the person making that claim, right? I am the person attesting to this fact. Right? It's not that it's not that me as an individual is saying we are SOC 2. It is that I am saying we do role-based access controls because I own the identity federation in the company. Right. So I am literally attesting to that particular subset of this overall thing. Right. Then the auditors need to go through, validate that, and then they attest to SOC 2 as a whole. Right. And then that's kind of the way that would work in like a distributed organization. If we were treating that as like a release pipeline, for example, like each step of the release pipeline is signing its own thing, saying, I did this thing. What that means for the layout, I think we could get very flexible with that. We could list the evidence separately at a root level object like this. We could use refs between them all. Like that's an implementation detail. But I think that if we agree that each step in the process or each sub thing, each claim with evidence is an attestation. It's an internal attestation, right? So I guess that's the question are we saying then that a claim plus evidence is an attestation that meets a requirement?
All right. I just put together a drawing quickly to kind of see if I understand it. So I sent the link as well. Let me know if you can open it and
I can see it.
Yeah. Like I'm understanding each attestation as collection of requirement references, claim plus evidence references, and a map of requirement to claim.
So I think what we were just talking about was that each of those in the bottom left box is also an attestation. So claim plus evidence is an attestation to something, is an attestation to the requirement if you're doing all that sub stuff.
Yes. So what I was, I guess, trying to do is the map of requirement to claim can also be an attestation, right?
Okay.
So attestation ref or a map of a claim plus evidence which you have in your own, like in your own document, or a reference to an existing attestation. So if as an auditor, I'm actually creating or building my own evidence stack or claim stack, then I can include it in the document. Or if you want to refer to a team, like if I'm the low-level team, I provided an attestation of a claim plus a requirement, then you can refer it in the attestation or the mapping part. Would that make sense?
I think so.
Is that thinking with you, Dunbar or Steve or Ian? Sorry. Like,
yeah, no worries. Yeah, no,
everybody is Ian. Like first name is like.
I know it's my company directories. So.
Anyway,
and also, I don't work for US. I work for Lockheed Martin. That's why. I don't know why they said that this way. No, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
So the map is an attestation in and of itself. So how, from an implementation perspective, what would that look like?
So in your JSON, requirement stays as a separate array, right? Claims stays as a separate array. and your attestation will be requirements like a JSON of requirement comma claim, or a claim array. So you reference to a requirement and you list all the claims which is attached to it, or you can have an attestation ref, which is
If claims are separate, then wouldn't the evidence also need to be separate?
Yeah, because there could be one piece of evidence that supports multiple claims as well. But I think that
Right.
that's where we could kind of get clever, maybe too clever. This might be a nightmare to implement, but if our attestations are actually the map of attestations, that's an array of them. There's multiple attestations, and it can have multiple requirements, but the requirement should have a map to specific evidence and claim, I think. But then we could do that nesting thing that we were talking about earlier, meaning that we could hang on a second, I have to think this one through. I think there's something to be said for having the attestations be an array where each element within the array is saying who is attesting to what. So having who the individual is with the requirement and the claim and the evidence, and possibly the confidence information in there as well, right? And if it's an array of those, that could meet the use case of an internal auditor, an external auditor. You could filter out any of the details. You could filter out the evidence and the claims. My question here is, if it's an array of claims, the evidence should support the claim, right? You shouldn't leave it to guessing of which evidence supports which claim if you're doing multiples in the array. So I would think that that claims array should maybe be a claim plus evidence array. And then the
Okay, so
confidence.
right now we've got it, just what evidence supports which claims.
We were talking about breaking that out, right, into the map.
Right. But were you just saying though, to put the evidence inside the claim?
Up in line 51, where it is in the attestation. That's where I'm wondering, because right here we've got in 51, we're saying, hey, claim 1. And line 54, we're saying evidence 1. Well, how do we know that those two map together in the attestation? Where is that mapping in the attestation itself that, is the thing that we're attesting to? That's why I'm wondering if it should be up here where we have a claim and a evidence thing here specifically, and not have the ref down in line 87. Otherwise, the alternative, I think, would be that we just have the claims up in 50, and then we map the claim to the supporting evidence for the claim down in the 70 area somewhere. Like, how do we think that we should organize that hierarchy?
Yeah,
I like your idea where attestation is essentially a mapping of this is the requirement, this is the claim, this is the evidence attached to it, and I attest to this whole chain.
right.
So
yeah, because there, then we also get that confidence and reasoning ability up there. Like, I do kind of like that, maybe keeping them as optional fields or something, but like, I like having all that in one spot up there. Maybe we do want to still support, claims in the claim section down in line 70 there. Maybe in that area, we do want to support refs out to the evidence as well. I don't know, but I kind of like it up here. I think it makes sense up here. I'm just trying to think through from like an auditing perspective, would I want to look through all of the things that I'm attesting to and see all the evidence there? Would I want to be able to look through all of my claims and see all the refs there? Do I want them in both places? And then that's referential integrity that we're putting into the document to make sure that the things are referencing each other properly. I'm not sure about that part. That's the part that I'm not sure about. But I do think having it here in the attestation is one of the, I think that would be very beneficial.
Kind of like where this is going.
You do or don't?
I do. I
Oh,
do.
okay.
I do.
Good. I wasn't sure.
But with that though, wouldn't the mapping also include the requirements or no?
Yeah, that would be the thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder if we don't need a different noun here, because this is that claim on 50 isn't really a claim anymore. It's something else. It's
a
the
mapping of
actual,
something.
yeah, it's the actual attestation map.
Mhm.
Call it map for now. I like that. And then we've just got in there, we've got a claim, evidence, and a requirement, right? All as refs.
Right.
And that's very, very clean.
Mhm.
Then. And then we have the other metadata for those things where we say, well, here's our confidence in this, right? I'm not sure if mitigation strategy is right there or not, but I like the fact that like our confidence is there. We have a score, we have a spot for commentary. I don't know if we need both reasoning and confidence. I'm not sure why we would have separate ones there, but overall, this type of a mapping makes a lot of sense. The rest of the document can be very flat at that point. We really are looking in one spot for any of the relations then.
Yep. And we want to support one-to-many in the map, right? So one requirement, multiple claims.
Yeah, but that works here. So in the map, you've just got the primary key would be the requirement with the claim and the evidence.
Okay, so you just like, okay, if there are multiple, you just have multiple maps.
I would think so.
All right, all right.
Thinking it through from an implementation perspective, though, you might not be able to always meet a requirement with one claim and one evidence, right? So
Yes.
maybe we should have a requirement, and then the claims should be an array and the evidence should be an
Should
array
be an
within
array,
there.
yeah, yeah.
But then we go back to the same problem we had a second ago, where how do you determine which evidence supports which claim? So should this be a nested object here where you have a claim evidence map, where you have claim one and then an array of evidence that supports that claim? I'm not sure. I'm totally throwing that out for conversation.
Yeah.
Because it really depends on how granular you get with your requirement. But you know, like you go to NIST and those requirements are notoriously not granular.
Mhm.
Right? So you're going to need to have multiple things to support that one claim for sure, or to report that one requirement, right? You're going to need multiple things there, right? And then you may have multiple pieces of evidence to support that claim. So I'm kind of thinking that this would be like, hey, for this requirement, we have an array of claims, and then the array of claims for each claim, right? That's actually an array of objects rather. And then in there we have a claim with an array of evidence.
With an array of evidence.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would look like, I'm confused here. So this is an object, you said, right? Claim, oh wait, claim is an object, and then
Yep, claim.
claims.
And then there would be claim colon, whatever the claim ref is.
Yep.
Claim, colon, and then,
Whatever the claim ref, right?
right,
And then below that, we would have an array of evidence,
Yep.
which would be an array of evidence refs.
Mhm.
got it, okay. So,
Then this gives us the flexibility of being able to reuse claims, reuse evidence to support the claims, right, across multiple requirements, but still be very clear on what's mapping to which requirement.
right,
And then all of this is what's being assessed to, right? So me, if I'm a developer, or if I own IAM, again, if we use that example, I am attesting to the fact that we do role-based access controls. Here is my evidence. I'm going to have a lot of claims and a lot of evidence for that one thing. But
Yep.
all of that could be laid out individually in the evidence and claims sections, and then all referenced here. And then any other requirement for another certification or whatever could also reuse that evidence. All of it could be very cleanly mapped. The only thing I think we lose here is the mapping between requirements, but you could tease that out with a little bit of analysis on this. So I still think it's probably very useful to do things this way. And then if we needed to drop what Ian was talking about earlier, if we needed to drop the low level details because we want to just show the high level assessment, we could actually just find the assessors, like the external auditors assessment here, right? And their mapping with the evidence claims. And then we could actually just drop the refs in the bottom, and then there goes all the details.
Right.
So from a usability perspective, this is also very usable for both internal and external use cases.
So going back to what me and Ian were talking about is also, do we want to have low-level attest, like when I, as a low-level team, make an attestation, how do we refer to it? Does that become a claim in this document, or is it an attestation reference in this map?
That's a good question. I think it could go either way, depending on how you wanted to implement it.
Right. Yeah. That's
but ambiguity is not good in a standard like that.
So you're talking about specifically how to refer to these things?
How to refer to low-level teams attestations, where in this case, an auditor comes in, creates their own claims for their requirements and maps it to the evidence. If there are existing like attestations, for example, I have made sure all the pull requests are reviewed. So that is based on a requirement. I made an attestation for my team. So that attestation, how do I refer to it here?
So the way Cyclone works is that you have these things called external references.
Right.
We've doubled the amount of external references in 1.5. One of those external reference types is attestation.
Okay.
So yeah, so for the BOM itself, which is basically the organization, for any component, for any service, you can have 0 or more attestations. So
okay, so in this case, for a requirement, I'll also be able to have a BOM ref for attestation.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
Also,
we've doubled the amount of external references in 1.5. It's yeah.
Well, I think that we could also make the argument that if you wanted this document to stand on its own, that an implementation specific detail would be a claim, and you would be supplying evidence. So I would think that you would supply the claims and the evidence and add them to the document as a whole, or the tooling that you're using would do that. And then the point of the auditor in there, whether it's an internal auditor or an external auditor, would be to make sure that the mappings and the claim and the evidence all actually work together properly. So when we were just going through this whole exercise, I thought that this entire section, this is an assessor, right? This could be an internal team or an external team. This is an array within here. So if you can scroll up for a second, Steve.
Sure.
Just a little bit there, right? So this is all in the attestation section 33. So we might be having very low level requirements here that we are attesting to that our team does, right? And then the overall assessor is going to look at all of these attestations within here and say, oh no, you're missing something.
Yeah, so the part which is missing in the attestation section right now is, how do I refer to all these teams attestation?
The previous assess. Yeah, okay. So like we've got this map of requirement to claims and evidence. We kind of need something for that high level attestation for this attestation is now a bundle of these other attestations.
Exactly. That's the point I was going for. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be the whole document at that point?
Yeah, I mean, because what we're creating is a bill of attestations, right?
At that point. And then it would
So
be
at that
kind of
point, you
signing
just-
that entire attestation document. So if we were to use the in toto framework example, right, it would be that overall signing envelope with this predicate within there. If we were
Okay.
using that mental model.
Okay.
So I guess how would we apply that here, right? So we've got this declaration. The declaration holds our requirements, our attestations within there, the mapping of them, the claims, the evidence. So would we sign the whole thing? Would we say that like we allow for one level of attestations here, and then in that declarations section at the very root, we support an overall envelope of some kind for an external auditor?
Not sure I understand the question.
So what we're missing in here is a way to tie all of the attestations together. Right, we have our list of requirements. Theoretically, we should be able to go through each of the attestations and see which requirements are met and which ones are not met, right? But that final auditor, the external auditor, the SOC 2 assessment guy, comes in and wants to sign off on the whole thing, right? Do they just add another attestation in here? If they do, then the attestation format we have here doesn't work because it doesn't support referencing other attestations.
Well, let's take a step back, right? I mean, that's evidence. So evidence could be other attestations. And I expect that to be a bomb ref.
That's a good point. Yeah. Evidence could be
Yeah.
other.
Well, that's a little funky for the way that we have it laid out right now, though, right? You're not wrong, though, like it could be, but then we've got circular referencing going on, and that can break really easily. So what could we do to make that functionality happen? Again, if we were dealing with multiple documents, you could just have another document that has that other one as the ref. And to your point, that's the evidence, right? The claim and the evidence and everything is wrapped in that one thing, and then you could sign it that way. But
Wow, we're over time, but time goes by quick. Okay, so we need to figure out how to group attestations and potentially sign that grouping of attestations, right? Now in Cyclone, we have nested components, and you can love them, you can hate them, but you know, infinite recursion is possible with Cyclone by design. Because we want the ability to sign at every single level, no matter how far down the rabbit hole you go. Whether we want to do that here or not should be debated, but I think we need to figure that out maybe next time we meet for sure.
Cool.
All right. I feel good. This is I think we're making some progress. So thank you. Thank you for everyone for your opinions and for helping drive this effort forward. So yeah, I look forward to talking to you all next week.
Yep.
Cheers.
Everyone.
sounds good. Take care.
Bye-bye.